Chapter 1. The Call. Wade Moran was reviewing footage for his latest documentary when his phone vibrated across the editing desk. The screen showed Pine Ridge Academy. His 15-year-old daughter Autumn's school never called during lunch. Mr. Moran? Principal Kenneth Cross's voice carried an unfamiliar tension. I need you to come to the school immediately. Don't use the main entrance. Park in the back lot by the maintenance building. Wade's fingers paused over his keyboard. What's wrong? Is Autumn hurt? She's physically fine. But Mr. Moran, this is serious. We have a situation. Cross's voice dropped lower. The police are here. The 15-minute drive felt like an hour. Wade had spent the last decade making documentaries that exposed corruption, but nothing prepared a father for those words. The police are here. His mind raced through possibilities. Autumn was a straight-A student, shy and artistic, more likely to sketch in her notebook than cause trouble. Pine Ridge Academy sat on a pristine campus that served the children of the town's wealthy families. Wade and his wife Stella had stretched their budget to afford tuition, believing in the school's reputation. Now, as he pulled into the empty backlot, that reputation felt like quicksand. Every classroom window had its blinds drawn tight. 2 patrol cars sat near the gymnasium, their presence screaming something was very wrong. Wade's documentary instincts kicked in. He noted everything. The unusual silence, the absence of students on the grounds, the way Principal Cross met him at the side door instead of his office. Cross was a thin man in his 50s, usually composed and diplomatic. Today, his face was pale, tie loosened, fingers trembling slightly as he held the door. Thank you for coming quickly. Please, follow me. They walked through empty corridors. The silence felt oppressive, institutional. Where's Autumn? Wade asked. In the counselor's office with Mrs. Doyle. She's very upset. Cross stopped outside his office door where 2 officers waited. Detective Brian Torres, according to his badge, was younger than Wade expected, maybe 35, with alert eyes that studied Wade carefully. The second officer, a woman named Rochelle Osborne, stood with her arms crossed, expression unreadable. Mr. Moran, Torres began, I'm going to be direct. During a routine locker inspection this morning, we discovered disturbing items in your daughter's locker. Wade's stomach dropped. What kind of items? Torres glanced at Cross, who cleared his throat. A hunting knife. Printed photographs of another student, Lena Flores, with threatening messages written on them. And a journal containing violent fantasies about harming her. The words hit Wade like physical blows. That's impossible. Autumn doesn't even know how to hold a knife. She's never been in a fight. She draws flowers and landscapes, for God's sake. We understand this is shocking, Osborne said, her tone clipped and professional. But the evidence is very specific. We've also found text messages on Autumn's phone that corroborate these items. I want to see my daughter. Now, Torres nodded. Of course. But Mr. Moran, you need to understand the gravity of this situation. Lena Flores's family has already been contacted. They're considering pressing charges. The school is discussing expulsion. And depending on what our investigation reveals, your daughter could face serious criminal charges for stalking and terroristic threats. Wade forced himself to think through the panic. Something was wrong with this picture. His daughter, the girl who cried when they accidentally hit a squirrel with their car last month, did not write violent fantasies about classmates. I want a lawyer, Wade said firmly. And I'm taking Autumn home. Right now. Cross shifted uncomfortably. We need to complete our investigation. My daughter is a minor, and you've conducted this search without notifying her parents first. Unless you're charging her with something right now, I'm taking her home. Wade's voice carried the authority of someone who dealt with bureaucratic obstruction before. And I'll need copies of everything you found. Photos of the locker contents, the messages, all of it. Torres studied Wade for a long moment, then nodded slowly. We can arrange that. But Mr. Moran, I'd advise cooperating fully with this investigation. The evidence is compelling. 20 minutes later, Wade walked out with Autumn, who hadn't stopped crying since the side door. Her small frame shook against him as he guided her to his car. Stella was already on her way from her shift at the hospital where she worked as a surgical nurse. Dad, I didn't do any of that, Autumn whispered as they drove. I swear, I don't even know Lena that well. She's a senior. We've maybe said hi twice. Wade glanced at his daughter's tear-stained face in the rearview mirror. I believe you, sweetheart. And we're going to prove it. But as they drove home, Wade's mind was already working. He'd spent years investigating conspiracies and cover-ups for his documentaries. Every instinct he'd honed told him something about this was staged. The convenient discovery, the rushed police involvement, the complete evidence package, it was all too neat. Someone had framed his daughter, and Wade was going to find out who and why. And when he did, they would wish they'd never heard the name Moran. Chapter 2. The Investigation. The Moran home became a war room. Wade's documentary equipment, usually scattered across his home office, now covered the dining room table. Stella sat beside him, still in her scrubs from the hospital, dark circles under her eyes from a double shift followed by this nightmare. Autumn was upstairs in her room, sedated by anxiety medication their family doctor had prescribed. "Tell me exactly what happened this morning," Wade said, his laptop open, fingers poised over keys. He'd already begun compiling a timeline. Stella recounted the events. Autumn left for school normally at 7:30. Everything was fine. Then you got the call. Wade pulled up the photos Principal Cross had reluctantly provided. The locker contents were laid out like evidence at a crime scene. The hunting knife was an expensive buck model, still in its sheath. The photographs of Lena Flores, a beautiful dark-haired senior, had been defaced with red marker. "She doesn't deserve to be happy. Make her pay. Everyone will see." The journal was worse. Page after page of violent fantasies written in handwriting that looked like Autumn's but felt wrong to Wade's eyes. He'd seen his daughters writing thousands of times, on birthday cards, school assignments, grocery lists on the fridge. This was similar but not identical. "This is a forgery," Wade said, zooming in on the digital image. "Look at the way the G's loop. Autumn always makes them with a closed circle. These are open." Stella leaned closer. "Are you sure? I've reviewed hundreds of hours of handwriting analysis for my documents. This is good, but it's not perfect." Wade made a note. Whoever did this had access to samples of her writing, but they're working from copies, not original muscle memory. His phone rang. The lawyer they'd retained, Hector Hopkins, recommended by a colleague who'd been involved in one of Wade's documentaries, had preliminary information. "Mr. Moran, I've reviewed the evidence package. I have to be honest, it looks bad on the surface. But there are procedural issues with how the search was conducted. The school claims they received an anonymous tip this morning that Autumn was planning something. That's what prompted the locker search." "Anonymous from where?" "They won't say. The principal is invoking school safety protocols. But here's what's interesting. The tip came through the school's website contact form at 6:47 a.m. 7 minutes later, at 6:54 a.m., a second anonymous tip went directly to the local police non-emergency line." Wade's fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling up Pine Ridge Academy's website. Someone wanted both the school and police involved immediately. They wanted this to move fast, before anyone could think too hard about it. Exactly. And there's something else. Lena Flores's family hired representation within 2 hours of being notified. Not just any lawyer, Quentin Hall. The name made Wade pause. The Quentin Hall? The one who runs Hall and Associates. The same. He's the most expensive attorney in 3 counties. Why would a family hire him so quickly for what's essentially a school incident? Unless they were expecting this. After hanging up, Wade turned to Stella. "Lena Flores's family is connected to something. They had Hall on retainer or on standby. This whole thing was coordinated." Stella's medical training made her analytical. What would they gain from framing Autumn? That's what we need to find out. Wade opened a new file on his laptop. "I need to know everything about Lena Flores, her family, Quentin Hall, and anyone else connected to this. There's a reason they chose Autumn specifically." Over the next 2 days, Wade barely slept. He reached out to contacts from his documentary work, private investigators, journalists, even a few reformed hackers who owed him favors for not including certain details in past films. The picture that emerged was complex and disturbing. Lena Flores was the daughter of Donnie McKinney, a real estate developer who'd recently changed his surname when he married into the wealthy Flores family. McKinney had built half the new developments in town over the past decade. Quentin Hall wasn't just his lawyer. Hall was his business partner in multiple ventures. But it was the third connection that made everything click. Principal Kenneth Cross had a brother, Kelvin Cross, who worked as a project manager for McKinney's development company. "They're all connected," Wade told Stella on the third night, showing her the web of relationships he'd mapped out on his corkboard, like something from one of his crime documentaries. McKinney, Hall, the Cross brothers. But what does this have to do with Autumn? The answer came from an unexpected source. Wade's friend Lewis Ritter, an investigative journalist at the local paper, called with information that made Wade's blood run cold. "You need to see something," Lewis said. "Can you meet me?" They met at a coffee shop far from Pine Ridge. Lewis slid a folder across the table. Inside were property records and development plans for a tract of land on the outskirts of town. "Recognize the address?" Lewis asked. Wade's heart sank. It was the old Henderson property, 40 acres of pristine woodland that had been in Stella's family for 3 generations. Her grandmother had left it to them in her will 2 years ago. They'd planned to build a retirement home there someday. "McKinney's been trying to buy that land for 18 months, Lewis explained. "It's the last piece he needs for a massive commercial development. But your wife won't sell." Wade remembered the increasingly aggressive offers, the calls from real estate agents, the pressure tactics. Stella had refused every time. The land held too many family memories. "So they frame our daughter to pressure us into selling?" Wade's voice was deadly quiet. "It's worse than that." Lewis pulled out more documents. 3 other families in similar situations had their kids involved in incidents at Pine Ridge over the past 2 years. All of them coincidentally owned property McKinney wanted. One family's son was caught with drugs in his gym bag, planted, but they couldn't prove it. He was expelled. Another family's daughter was accused of plagiarism that ruined her college applications. The third kid was accused of assault. Every family eventually sold their property at well below market value to make the problems go away. Jesus Christ. Wade stared at the documents. They're using the school as a weapon. Cross gets a cut from his brother Kelvin. Hall handles the legal intimidation. And McKinney gets his land deals. It's elegant and nearly impossible to prove. Nearly impossible. But Wade had made a career out of proving the impossible. Chapter 3. The Setup. Wade spent the next week becoming someone he'd never been before. Not a documentarian observing from the outside, but a player moving pieces on a board. His first move was subtle. He called Principal Cross and requested a meeting to discuss cooperation with the investigation. Cross, believing Wade was ready to cave, agreed immediately. "Mr. Moran," Cross said, gesturing to a chair in his office. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. These situations are difficult for everyone." Wade smiled, the same pleasant smile he used to put interview subjects at ease. "I've been thinking about Autumn's future. This accusation, even if we fight it, could follow her forever. I want to find a way to resolve this that's best for everyone." Cross leaned back, trying to hide his satisfaction. "What did you have in mind? If the evidence against Autumn were to become less certain? If perhaps there were questions about the chain of custody or the reliability of the anonymous tip, the school might be persuaded to view this as a misunderstanding rather than a criminal matter." "That would depend on many factors," Cross said carefully. "The Flores family is quite upset. They'd need assurances." "Of course. And I imagine those assurances might involve my family being more cooperative with certain business interests in town." Cross's expression shifted, showing a flash of calculation before smoothing into fake concern. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Moran. But if you're suggesting that some sort of arrangement might ease tensions all around, I'm sure Mr. McKinney would be happy to discuss purchasing your property at a fair price." The Henderson property. Wade kept his voice neutral. The one his development needs to move forward. Property changes hands all the time. Sometimes it's better to be flexible, especially when family is involved. Wade nodded slowly, as if considering. "I'll need to discuss this with my wife. But Principal Cross, I want you to understand something. My daughter is everything to me. If there's a way to protect her from this nightmare, even if it costs us financially, I have to consider it." Of course. Cross stood, extending his hand. "I'll let the appropriate parties know you're willing to have a conversation. These things have a way of resolving themselves when everyone acts reasonably." Wade shook his hand, hiding his disgust. "I'll wait to hear from you." Outside, Wade sat in his car and called Lewis. "I need you to run a story. Not about McKinney, not yet. About school security failures at Pine Ridge Academy. Frame it as general concern about anonymous tips and locker searches. Don't mention Autumn specifically, just raise questions about procedures. You want to make them nervous? I want to make them overconfident. They think I'm going to fold. Let them think they're winning while we build the real case." The article ran 3 days later. It was measured and professional, raising legitimate questions about student privacy and security protocols. The comments section exploded with parents expressing concern. Principal Cross called Wade within hours. "Mr. Moran, I saw the article in the paper. I hope you're not trying to create problems." "Principal Cross, I had nothing to do with that article. But it does raise valid concerns, doesn't it? If my daughter's rights were violated in this process, that could complicate everything." Wade let silence hang. "Of course, if we were able to reach an understanding about the property situation, my family would have no reason to pursue those questions further." He could almost hear Cross's relief through the phone. "Let me arrange a meeting with Mr. McKinney and Mr. Hall. I think we can come to terms that benefit everyone." "Perfect." Wade hung up and opened a new file on his computer. He titled it, "The Frame, a Documentary." For the next week, Wade played his part perfectly. He met with McKinney at an expensive restaurant, a handsome man in his 50s who oozed charm and wore success like cologne. Quentin Hall joined them, a cold-eyed lawyer who watched Wade like a snake watching a mouse. "Mr. Moran," McKinney began, "I want to express my sympathy for your situation. As a father myself, I can't imagine how difficult this must be." "Thank you," Wade said quietly. "I just want my daughter to have a future." Of course. And I believe we can help with that." McKinney pushed a contract across the table. "This is an offer for the Henderson property. It's quite generous, actually above market value. And if you and your wife were to accept it, I imagine the unfortunate misunderstanding at the school could be resolved quickly. Teenagers make mistakes. They have misguided thoughts sometimes. Perhaps this was all blown out of proportion." Wade looked at the contract without touching it. The offer was indeed generous, nearly double what they'd been offered before. Blood money to make this disappear. "How would it work?" Wade asked. "The evidence is pretty damning." Hall spoke for the first time, his voice smooth as oil. "Evidence can be recontextualized. The anonymous tips could be deemed unreliable. The journal might be seen as creative writing, misunderstood fiction. The photographs could be explained as a poorly thought-out art project. It all depends on how the narrative is presented." "And Lena would drop her complaint?" "She would," McKinney confirmed. "My stepdaughter was frightened, but she's a reasonable girl. If assured that Autumn was simply struggling with some adolescent issues and has received appropriate counseling, she would feel comfortable putting this behind her." Wade nodded slowly, playing the desperate father. "I need to talk to my wife. This is a big decision." "Of course. But Mr. Moran, opportunities like this don't last forever. The longer this situation continues, the more difficult it becomes to walk back. You understand." McKinney's smile didn't reach his eyes. It was a threat wrapped in silk. "I understand perfectly," Wade said, and he did. He understood that these men had perfected a shakedown operation that destroyed families and stole their property. He understood that they'd done it before and would do it again. And he understood exactly how to destroy them. "I'll have an answer for you in 48 hours, Wade said. As he left the restaurant, Wade activated the recording device he'd hidden in his jacket lining. He'd captured everything. The veiled threats, the offer to manipulate evidence, the explicit quid pro quo between the property sale and making the charges disappear. But Wade wasn't ready to use that yet. First, he needed to gather more pieces. Because when he moved against these men, it wouldn't be just exposure. It would be complete destruction. He had 48 hours to prepare. And he had spent 10 years learning how to destroy people who thought they were untouchable. Chapter 4, Hidden Truths. Wade converted his home office into mission control. 3 monitors displayed different feeds, security camera footage he'd legally obtained through FOIA requests, financial records from public databases, and a growing timeline of McKinney's land deals. Stella worked beside him when her hospital shifts allowed, her medical mind helping him see patterns he might have missed. "There's something else here," Stella said, pointing to a series of payments in McKinney's company records. "Look, monthly transfers to an LLC called Sunrise Properties. Same amount every month for 3 years." Wade traced the LLC through Delaware incorporation records, then through a maze of shell companies. The trail eventually led to a name that made him pause. Hiram Dorsey, a county zoning commissioner. "They're paying off the zoning board," Stella breathed. "That's how McKinney gets his developments approved so fast." Wade made a note. "That's piece number 3. We have the school shakedown scheme, the property extortion, and now bribery of public officials. But we need more. The answer came from an unexpected source. Autumn, who had been mostly silent since the incident, appeared in the doorway of the office one evening. She looked fragile but determined. "Dad, I remembered something." She sat down, twisting her hands together. "About 2 weeks before this happened, I was in the art room after school, finishing a project. Lena came in. She was upset, crying. She didn't know I was there. She was on the phone with someone, talking about her stepfather. She said, 'I won't do it again, I don't care what he says.' And then she said something about the school being used for his deals." Wade leaned forward. "Did she say anything else?" "She mentioned my name. She said, 'Not the Moran girl, she's never done anything.'" Then whoever was on the phone must have argued because Lena got really upset and said, "There has to be another way." Autumn's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, I think she knew they were going to frame me, and she didn't want to be part of it." This changed everything. Lena wasn't just the victim in the false narrative. She was potentially a witness. Wade immediately called Hector Hopkins. "We need to talk to Lena Flores," Wade told the lawyer. "Without her stepfather or Quentin Hall present, that's going to be difficult. She's 17, still a minor, and under her parents' roof. Any approach could be seen as witness tampering." Wade thought for a moment. "What if she came to us? That would be different. But how would you make that happen?" The plan took shape over the next 24 hours. Wade reached out to someone he'd interviewed for a documentary 3 years ago, Dorothy King, a high school counselor at a different school in the district who had helped him with a story about student mental health. Dorothy owed him. His documentary had helped secure funding for her program. "Dorothy, I need a favor." Wade explained the situation carefully, leaving out the illegal elements. "I believe a student is being coerced by her family. If she were to reach out for counseling support, would you be able to meet with her confidentially?" Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. "Wade, if this girl is truly in danger or being pressured into something illegal, I have a duty to help. But you need to be straight with me. What's really going on?" Wade told her everything. When he finished, Dorothy was angry. "I've heard rumors about Pine Ridge. Never anything I could prove, but parents talk. There's been too many incidents there. Give me 24 hours. She called back the next evening. "Lena reached out to me. She said a friend told her about my counseling services. We're meeting tomorrow after school. How did you get her to contact you?" "I didn't. But apparently someone left information about confidential counseling services in her locker, along with a note that said, 'You don't have to be part of this.' I wonder who could have done that." Wade smiled grimly. He'd had Lewis's teenage son, who attended Pine Ridge, slip the note in during passing period. Plausible deniability. When Dorothy met with Lena, the girl broke down completely. Dorothy recorded the session. With Lena's permission and presence as an adult counselor made it legal, and the story that emerged was worse than Wade had imagined. Donnie McKinney wasn't just Lena's stepfather. He'd been controlling and abusive since marrying her mother 4 years ago. He'd used Lena before, having her befriend the children of property owners he wanted to target, gathering information, even planting evidence when ordered. The threat was always the same: cooperate or her mother would suffer. "He showed me Autumn's locker combination," Lena told Dorothy, her voice hollow. "He gave me the knife, the pictures, the journal. He had someone forge it. I put it all in her locker the morning before school. Then I had to wait in the bathroom while he called in the anonymous tips." She started crying. "I didn't want to do it. Autumn never did anything to me. But he said if I didn't, he'd hurt my mom. And he would, he's done it before." Dorothy immediately contacted Child Protective Services and the police. The real police, not Rochelle Osborne, who Wade had discovered was Quentin Hall's ex-wife and still on his payroll for consulting services. Lena was removed from her home that evening and placed in protective custody. Within hours, McKinney knew something had gone wrong. He called Wade, and the charm was gone from his voice. "I don't know what you think you're doing, Moran, but you're playing a very dangerous game. My stepdaughter is troubled. Anyone can see that. If she's making wild accusations, nobody will believe her." "Maybe not alone," Wade said calmly. "But when her testimony is combined with financial records showing bribes to zoning officials, recordings of you and Quentin Hall explicitly offering to manipulate evidence in exchange for property, and testimony from other families you've extorted over the years, I think people will believe that." Silence on the line. "Then, what do you want?" "I want everything. I want my daughter's name cleared completely. I want every family you've extorted to get their property back or fair compensation. I want you, Hall, and the Cross brothers arrested and charged. And I want to make sure you never do this to another family." McKinney's laugh was harsh. "You self-righteous prick. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have connections throughout this county, judges, police, politicians. Even if you had proof, which you don't, I'd walk away clean." "Then I guess we're going to find out," Wade said, and hung up. Stella looked at him, worried. "Wade, he's right about his connections. What if we can't win this legally?" Wade turned to his wife, and in his eyes was something she'd never seen before: cold, calculated determination. "Who said anything about winning legally? I'm going to destroy him completely, and I'm going to make him destroy himself." Chapter 5: The Art of War. Wade's plan required patience and precision. He'd spent years studying people like McKinney for his documentaries, men who believed they were smarter than everyone else, who'd gotten away with corruption for so long they'd become careless. That arrogance would be their downfall. "We need to separate them," Wade told his small team, which now included Lewis Ritter, Dorothy King, and a private investigator named Benjamin Atkinson who specialized in white-collar crime. "McKinney, Hall, and the Cross brothers are strong together. Divide them, and they'll turn on each other." Benjamin had already been digging into Quentin Hall's business dealings. Hall's been skimming from McKinney's development deals. "I've got records showing he's diverted at least $2 million over the past 5 years into offshore accounts. McKinney doesn't know." "Perfect," Wade said. "What about the Cross brothers?" "Kenneth is terrified of losing his position at Pine Ridge. His pension depends on another 3 years. Kelvin's already got gambling debts, over $100,000 to some very unpleasant people." Wade smiled. It was time to start applying pressure. First, Wade had Lewis publish a follow-up article about the school incident, but this time with more details. The story didn't name Autumn, but it described an elaborate frame-up attempt at a local private school that had been foiled by a vigilant parent and counselor. The article mentioned that authorities were investigating possible connections to property deals and extortion. The article went viral locally. Parents started pulling their kids from Pine Ridge Academy. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Principal Kenneth Cross called Wade, panic in his voice. "What are you doing? You said we had a deal." "We never had a deal, Kenneth. I was gathering evidence. But here's what I'm willing to do. You can be a witness against McKinney and Hall, or you can go down with them. Your choice." I can't. They'll destroy me. My brother. Your brother is going to prison regardless. The question is whether you join him or save yourself. You have 24 hours to decide." Wade hung up and immediately called Kelvin Cross, McKinney's project manager. "Kelvin, we need to meet. Your brother's about to flip on you and McKinney. I think you should know what's coming." They met in a parking lot. Kelvin was a harder man than his brother, with the weathered look of someone who'd made a lot of bad decisions. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Wade showed him copies of financial records linking Kelvin to bribe payments. "These are going to the FBI tomorrow. Bribery of public officials, conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion. You're looking at 15 to 20 years federal time, unless you cooperate." Kelvin's jaw worked. Kenneth would never talk. He already has. He gave us everything about the school scheme. But here's the thing, Kelvin, you can still make a deal. McKinney's the big fish. Hall's the one who structured everything legally. You and your brother? You're just employees. Help us nail them, and maybe you do 5 years instead of 20. Wade left Kelvin with that poison pill, letting doubt and fear do their work. Next was Quentin Hall. Wade couldn't approach him directly. Hall was too smart, too careful. But he didn't need to. He just needed to let McKinney know about Hall's embezzlement. Benjamin created a package of financial documents, real evidence of Hall's theft, but anonymously compiled and sent to McKinney's personal email from an untraceable account. The subject line read, "Your partner is stealing from you." McKinney went ballistic. He called an emergency meeting with Hall at Hall's office. Wade had arranged for Benjamin to plant a listening device there the day before. Illegal, yes, but Wade wasn't planning to use it in court. He just needed to know their moves. The conversation was explosive. $2 million, Quentin? You stole $2 million from our deals. Hall's voice was cold, calculating. I earned that money cleaning up your messes. Every time one of your schemes went sideways, I fixed it. Consider it hazard pay. You sanctimonious thief. I made you rich. You made yourself rich. I just kept you out of prison. But now you've gone too far. That Moran girl's father is a documentarian. Did you even think about that? He makes movies exposing people like us. And you decided to frame his daughter? We've done this 6 times before with no problems. Because those were normal families. Moran's different. He has resources, contacts, skills. You underestimated him, and now we're all exposed. There was a long silence. Then McKinney's voice, low and dangerous. So what do you suggest? We cut our losses. We disappear. I've got accounts in the Caymans, you've got your offshore holdings. We let the Cross brothers take the fall, claim we were duped, and start over somewhere else. Run away? I built this town. And now it's burning down around you. Face reality, Donnie. After the meeting ended, Wade had everything he needed. He sent copies of the conversation to both Cross brothers, along with a simple message. They're going to let you take the fall for everything. Time to choose sides. Kenneth Cross broke first. He called Hector Hopkins and asked to make a deal with prosecutors. Within hours, he was giving a full statement about the school scheme, naming McKinney and Hall as the architects, providing documents showing the pattern of targeting students whose families had desirable property. Kelvin lasted another day before he, too, decided to cooperate rather than be the last one holding the bag. With the Cross brothers both giving statements, the district attorney finally had enough for charges. Arrest warrants were issued for Donnie McKinney and Quentin Hall. But Wade wasn't done. Arrest and trial weren't enough. He wanted them ruined completely. Chapter 6. The Trap Springs. Wade's documentary team, people he'd worked with for years, arrived from across the country. They knew when Wade called with that particular tone in his voice, something big was happening. We're making a film, Wade told them. But this one's different. This one's personal. Over the next week, while McKinney and Hall posted bail and hired even more expensive lawyers, Wade and his team compiled everything into a 90-minute documentary. It had Lena's testimony, the recordings of McKinney and Hall's conversation, Kenneth and Kelvin Cross's confessions, financial records showing the bribery scheme, interviews with the other families who had been extorted, and Autumn's own story. But Wade added something else. He included footage of McKinney and Hall's bail hearing, their expensive lawyers arguing that these were just misunderstandings and overzealous business practices. He included clips of their homes, their cars, their privileged lives built on destroying others. The documentary, titled The Frame, How Power Predators Use Schools to Destroy Families, premiered not in theaters, but online. Wade released it simultaneously on YouTube, Vimeo, and every documentary platform he had connections with. He promoted it through every contact he had in media. It went viral within 6 hours. By the next morning, it had 5 million views. By the end of the week, it had been viewed over 20 million times. National news picked it up. The story of a father using his documentarian skills to expose the people who framed his daughter captured the public imagination. Pine Ridge Academy's board of directors dissolved the school entirely, unable to recover from the scandal. Hiram Dorsey, the zoning commissioner, resigned and was later charged with accepting bribes. The FBI opened investigations into McKinney's business practices going back 15 years. But the legal system was slow, and Wade knew that even with all the evidence, expensive lawyers could drag things out for years. McKinney and Hall could potentially win on technicalities. So Wade implemented the final phase of his plan. He released a second documentary, this one focusing specifically on Quentin Hall's legal career, showing how Hall had used legal technicalities and exploited the system to help guilty clients escape justice for decades. The documentary included interviews with victims of Hall's clients, families destroyed by people Hall had defended, and a detailed breakdown of Hall's most morally repugnant cases. The Bar Association immediately opened an ethics investigation. Hall's law firm, built over 30 years, saw half its partners resign within a week. Clients fled in droves. For McKinney, Wade took a different approach. He reached out to every contractor, subcontractor, and employee who had ever worked on McKinney's developments. He found dozens who hadn't been paid properly, who had been cheated on contracts, who had been forced to use substandard materials while McKinney pocketed the difference. Wade helped them file a class action lawsuit. With the FBI investigation ongoing and the documentary exposing McKinney's practices, banks began calling in loans. Development projects ground to a halt. Investors sued for fraud. Within 3 months, McKinney's real estate empire was in bankruptcy. But Wade's most devastating move was personal. He found Lena's mother, Ingrid Flores, who had been trapped in her marriage to McKinney through financial dependence and fear. Wade connected her with Resources, a top divorce attorney who worked pro bono after seeing the documentary, a support group for domestic abuse survivors, and financial advisors who helped her secure her own assets. Ingrid filed for divorce and, critically, filed charges against McKinney for years of domestic abuse. Combined with Lena's testimony, it painted a picture of a man who used violence and fear to control everyone around him. The final blow came from an unexpected direction. One of McKinney's former business partners, seeing the empire crumbling and desperate to save himself, provided evidence that McKinney had committed insurance fraud on multiple properties, deliberately having them damaged to collect insurance money. That was a federal crime, and unlike the complex web of extortion and bribery, insurance fraud was straightforward to prove. The FBI arrested McKinney again, this time without bail. Quinton Hall, disbarred and facing his own federal charges, made one last attempt to save himself by offering to testify against McKinney in exchange for a reduced sentence. The alliance between the two men shattered completely. Wade watched it all unfold from his home office, Autumn sitting beside him, her name now cleared completely. The school district had issued a formal apology. Several colleges had already reached out, offering her scholarships after hearing her story of resilience. "Is it over?" Autumn asked quietly. Wade pulled up the latest news article on his screen. McKinney had been denied bail on the federal charges. Hall was facing disbarment and likely prison time. The Cross brothers had already been sentenced to 5 years each. Hiram Dorsey was awaiting trial. "Almost," Wade said. "One more thing." Chapter 7, Unraveling. The federal trial of Donnie McKinney became the most watched proceeding in the county's history. Wade attended every day, sitting in the gallery with Stella and Autumn, a quiet presence that McKinney could see whenever he glanced at the audience. The prosecution was methodical, presenting a mountain of evidence. Kenneth Cross testified first, describing in detail how McKinney had orchestrated the school shakedown scheme. His voice shook as he admitted his own role, but he was clear about who had planned everything. "Mr. McKinney approached me 5 years ago," Kenneth said from the witness stand. "He said he needed a way to pressure certain families into selling property. He knew I had access to student lockers, student records, everything. He promised me money, a lot of money, and he said nobody would ever know." "And you agreed?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes." Kenneth looked at his hands. "God help me, I agreed. At first, it was small things. Spreading rumors about a family. Encouraging their child to transfer schools. But then it escalated. The planted evidence, the false accusations. Each time, Mr. McKinney would identify the target, and Mr. Hall would structure the legal pressure. My brother Kelvin would handle the paperwork on the eventual property sales. And I would destroy those children's lives to make it happen." The courtroom was silent. When Kenneth finished, his brother Kelvin took the stand. He provided details about the financial structure, how McKinney funneled money through shell companies, how they paid off Hiram Dorsey, how Quinton Hall had structured everything to appear legal while knowing it was extortion. "Did there come a time when you realized what you were doing was wrong?" the prosecutor asked. Kelvin's jaw worked. "Every time. But by then, I was in too deep. McKinney had leverage on everyone. That was his specialty. Find what people were ashamed of, what they were afraid of, and use it to control them." On the third day, Lena Flores took the stand. At 17, she looked younger, more fragile. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. She described years of abuse, of being forced to participate in her stepfather's schemes, of the fear that kept her silent. When the prosecutor asked her to describe the incident involving Autumn Moran, Lena looked directly at McKinney. "He gave me everything. The knife, the fake journal, the photographs he'd had printed from Autumn's social media. He told me exactly what to do and when to do it. He said if I didn't, he would hurt my mother. He'd done it before, so I knew he wasn't bluffing." "How did you feel about framing Autumn Moran?" "Sick. She was innocent. She'd never done anything wrong. But I was so scared." Tears ran down Lena's face. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm so sorry." McKinney's lawyer tried to paint Lena as an unreliable witness, a troubled teenager with a history of psychological issues. But the prosecution countered with testimony from Dorothy King, the counselor, and from multiple other witnesses who described McKinney's pattern of abuse and control. On the 5th day, Quinton Hall took the stand. He'd made a deal, full testimony against McKinney in exchange for a reduced sentence. Disbarred and facing ruin, Hall had nothing left to lose. Hall described McKinney's operations in clinical detail. How they'd identify families with desirable properties. How they'd research the families for vulnerabilities. How they'd use Pine Ridge Academy as the weapon, knowing that parents would do anything, including selling property at a loss, to protect their children. It was elegant, Hall said coldly. Legal pressure, social pressure, and emotional pressure all at once. Families would crumble within weeks. McKinney would buy their property for a fraction of its value, then flip it for millions in profit. We did this 8 times over 5 years. 8 times. The prosecutors sounded surprised. We've only documented 7 incidents. There was an 8th family. They came before the Morans. But something went wrong. The father had a nervous breakdown. He attempted suicide. Hall's face remained expressionless. We made sure to cover our tracks better after that. The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. Wade felt Stella's hand grip his arm tightly. They'd known it was bad, but to hear the casualties quantified so clinically was devastating. McKinney's defense tried to paint him as a victim of Hall's schemes, but the recorded conversation between them, the one where they discussed letting the Cross brothers take the fall, destroyed that narrative. McKinney's own words condemned him. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, insurance fraud, wire fraud, and bribery of a public official. The federal charges alone carried a potential sentence of 30 years. But Wade wasn't in the courtroom when the verdict was read. He was doing something more important. Chapter 8: Justice's Many Forms. While McKinney's trial dominated headlines, Wade was quietly working on a different project. He'd been contacted by families from other towns, other counties, who had experienced similar schemes. Not all involved schools. Some used business partnerships. Others used blackmail. But the pattern was the same. Powerful men targeting vulnerable families and using institutions as weapons. Wade began documenting these stories, creating a database of abuse that showed this wasn't isolated to McKinney. It was systemic. He presented his findings to the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division, and they opened investigations in 4 other jurisdictions. But more importantly, Wade worked with legislators to draft new laws. The Autumn-Moran Act, passed through the state legislature with overwhelming support. It created new protections for students and families, required independent oversight of school disciplinary actions, and imposed severe penalties for anyone using educational institutions for extortion or fraud. But legal victories weren't enough. Wade wanted to help rebuild what McKinney had destroyed. He established a fund for the families who had been extorted. Using the publicity from his documentary and the trial, Wade raised over $3 million in donations. The money went to helping the family whose father had attempted suicide, covering his medical bills and psychiatric care, funding college educations for the children who had been targeted, providing legal assistance to families fighting to reclaim their property, supporting victims of domestic abuse like Lena's mother. Lena herself was thriving in foster care with a family friend of Dorothy King's. She'd started therapy, and slowly, the bright girl underneath the trauma was emerging. She and Autumn had become friends, bonded by their shared ordeal. "I'm thinking about studying psychology," Lena told Wade one afternoon when she came over to work on homework with Autumn. "Maybe I can help other kids who've been manipulated like I was." "I think you'd be excellent at that," Wade said. But Wade's most satisfying revenge was yet to come. With McKinney in federal prison awaiting sentencing and his assets frozen, the bankruptcy court began liquidating his properties. Wade attended the auction where McKinney's personal mansion, a sprawling estate worth $5 million, was being sold. He bid on it and won for less than half its value. Then he had it demolished. The demolition was streamed live online as part of a documentary short Wade created titled The Fall of Empire. The mansion came down in a cloud of dust and rubble, and in its place, Wade donated the land to be turned into a community center for at-risk youth. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Quinton Hall fared no better. He'd received a reduced sentence for his cooperation, 8 years instead of 20, but his reputation was destroyed. The law firm he'd built was gone. His luxury lifestyle was gone. And perhaps most importantly, his sense of superiority was gone. Wade had arranged for Hall's case to be covered by every legal blog, podcast, and journal in the country. Hall became the cautionary tale for lawyers, a reminder that legal skills could be used for good or evil, and evil would eventually be exposed. The Cross brothers, serving their 5-year sentences, became examples in Wade's continuing work. He used their cases in presentations to school administrators, showing how institutions could be compromised and what safeguards needed to be in place. Principal Kenneth Cross wrote a letter to Wade from prison. It was filled with apologies, justifications, and ultimately, a recognition that he'd destroyed lives for money. Wade didn't respond, but he kept the letter. It would be part of his archive, a reminder that corruption often wore a respectable face. Chapter 9. The Aftermath. 2 years after that fateful phone call, Wade stood in his office looking at the wall of awards and recognition his documentaries had earned. But the one he was most proud of wasn't an award. It was a photograph. The photograph showed Autumn on her first day at Stanford University, where she'd been accepted with a full scholarship. She was studying child psychology, inspired by her own experience. Beside Autumn in the photo was Lena, who had been accepted to UC Berkeley and was pursuing a similar path. Stella came into the office, carrying coffee for both of them. Her shift at the hospital had just ended. "You've been staring at that photo for 10 minutes. Just thinking about how different things could have been. But they weren't. You made sure of that." Stella kissed his cheek. "Your daughter's thriving, the bad guys are in prison, and you've helped change laws to protect other families. That's a happy ending." Wade turned to his wife. "Is it though? We won this fight, but there are thousands of other families facing similar situations. Different predators, different schemes, but the same abuse of power. So what are you going to do about it?" Stella asked, though she already knew the answer. She'd been married to Wade long enough to recognize that look in his eyes. "I'm going to keep fighting." Wade pulled up a folder on his computer, requests for help from families across the country who'd seen his documentaries, and reached out. "I've gotten over 300 messages from people dealing with corruption, extortion, and abuse of power. Most of them can't afford lawyers or investigators, but they can afford to tell me their stories. You're starting a new documentary series. More than that, I'm creating a foundation, the Autumn Project, dedicated to helping families fight back against institutional corruption. We'll provide legal resources, investigation support, and media exposure. Turn victims into fighters." Stella smiled. "When do we start?" Wade pulled her close. "We already have." His phone buzzed, a message from Lewis Ritter. "New lead on a corrupt school board in the next county. Evidence of kickbacks and favoritism. 3 families affected so far." Wade looked at the message, then at the photo of his daughter, then back at Stella. "One more thing," he said. "McKinney's sentencing is next week. Do you want to attend?" "Do you?" Wade thought about it. Donnie McKinney was facing 30 years in federal prison. Quinton Hall was already serving 8. The Cross brothers were serving 5. Hiram Dorsey had received 3 years for accepting bribes. Every person who had targeted his family had paid a price. "No," Wade said finally. "I don't need to see him sentenced. I already won." The sentencing hearing for Donnie McKinney was standing room only. Journalists filled the gallery. The judge, a stern woman named Beverly Flynn, reviewed the evidence and victim impact statements. Lena's mother, Ingrid, gave a statement describing years of abuse. Kenneth Cross's wife spoke about how the corruption had destroyed her family. Multiple families talked about the trauma of having their children targeted. And a recorded statement from Autumn Moran played for the courtroom. "I was 15 years old when powerful men decided my life meant nothing compared to their profits. They tried to destroy my future, ruin my reputation, and break my spirit. But they underestimated one thing, my father. He showed me that when you're right, when you're fighting for truth and justice, you can beat anyone. No matter how rich they are. No matter how connected they are. Truth is stronger than corruption. Love is stronger than greed. And ordinary people, when they refuse to give up, are stronger than any predator." When McKinney was asked if he had anything to say, he stood but remained silent. There was nothing left to say. Every scheme had been exposed. Every ally had turned against him. Every asset had been seized. Judge Flynn sentenced him to the maximum, 30 years in federal prison without parole. As McKinney was led away in handcuffs, he looked broken, a far cry from the confident developer who had once controlled the town. The man who had destroyed families with casual cruelty now faced decades in a cell. His empire turned to dust, his name synonymous with corruption. That evening, Wade sat with Autumn on their back porch. The Henderson property, Stella's family land that had sparked this entire nightmare, stretched out before them. They decided not to sell it after all. Instead, they'd begun building the retirement home Stella had always dreamed of, nestled among the old-growth trees. "Dad," Autumn said quietly, "do you ever regret it? Fighting back so hard? You could have just sold the land, made the problem go away." Wade looked at his daughter, no longer the frightened 15-year-old, but a confident young woman heading to university. "If I had done that, McKinney would have kept destroying families. The Cross brothers would still be targeting children. Hall would still be manipulating the system. Sometimes, the only way to stop a predator is to fight back harder than they expect. Was it worth it? The stress, the danger, everything you went through." Wade smiled. "Autumn, you're going to Stanford to study psychology so you can help kids like Lena. She's going to Berkeley to do the same. We changed laws to protect families. We exposed a corruption network that spanned years. And we showed that ordinary people can beat powerful predators when they refuse to be victims. So yes, it was worth it. Every single moment." Autumn hugged her father. "Thank you for believing in me. For fighting for me." "Always," Wade said. "That's what family does." As the sun set over the Henderson property, Wade thought about the journey from that phone call 2 years ago to this moment. He'd faced corrupt officials, ruthless developers, and amoral lawyers. He'd broken some laws in the process, illegal recordings, surveillance, manipulation. But he'd also uncovered the truth, protected his family, and helped others. In his office, 3 new case files waited. 3 new families needed help. 3 new predators needed to be stopped. Wade smiled. The fight was far from over. But he'd learned something important. When you're protecting the people you love, when you're fighting for truth and justice, there's no obstacle too large, no enemy too powerful. And as long as there were families being targeted, Wade Moran would be there, armed with cameras, evidence, and an unshakable determination to make sure justice prevailed. The predators had learned a hard lesson. Never underestimate a father protecting his daughter. Never underestimate the power of truth. And never, ever underestimate Wade Moran. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.